Cool. Howdy, folks. It is August 5th on Monday, and this is the weekly OpenJS Security Collab space. Everybody's open free to join, and appreciate the group we have here today. So, on the agenda for today, um, we have just actually, well, I should have probably put this, I seem to have not put this on here for some reason, but I should have. Is I have some good news. The OpenJS security compliance guidelines are now in GitHub. It's not 100% yet, but and please, if you all see, do not like my naming format or the way I've done folder structure, please let me know, and I'm more than open to something different, but I just basically named it exactly what it is for easy readability. I have to clean this up a little bit more, but this was the initial kind of compliance guideline README file, which was kind of the description of the project. I'm in retrospect, now that I've put this in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some tweaks to take this and make it more of a background document and bring to the front a little bit more of the typical sort of README stuff, just to make it a little bit more usable. Um, and also, to be honest, I actually used a Google Docs to GitHub to Markdown converter instead of going through and doing it manually. That had some mixed results. So I'll be working on that. Uh,
Quick,
so,
quick question. So this
yeah.
group is not mandating any of this for the projects, correct? And two, we should blog about this as well. So,
Yeah. So my sense is it's not my is that's why they're compliance guidelines.
mhm.
There is a sense of these are the things you should be doing. And I think the expectation is to at least measure yourself against those so that we can have a sense of where folks are at. But to my understanding, there is no kind of consequence um, for not doing these things. Ben?
I think, I think maybe once this gets a little, some more feedback and people start playing with it a little bit, one thing that we could think about as part of, and I've said this before, as part of new project onboarding is if there is a admin, I wonder who that is. If there is a a set that is required,
Mhm.
right? A very small set of recommendations or something, but I don't know if this is true or not, but I could imagine there being a few of these that are not negotiable for projects that we're intaking into the foundation.
I would think so. Yeah, we
Yeah,
require that you post a privacy notice, that you have a code of conduct. So maybe, yeah, I would definitely get feedback from the CPC, but I agree that there should be maybe those must-haves.
yeah,
Today, the language is focused around expected rather than required,
Right.
to kind of thread the needle on that. But
I
once
think
this,
I think that's totally fine. Like I can imagine you know, a very small, short, these are the 5 things you need to do if you are coming into the OpenJS Foundation, right? And then here's the long list of um, additional guidelines that we recommend, right? But it wouldn't block a project from joining.
yeah, there is an interesting idea here. I think a more specific question is around how to use this um, when an incubating project graduates to being at larger impact. Um, there is a concept in here of something being deferrable versus being expected, and so the that could be interpreted in a way where it could be put into practice where in order for a project to graduate from being incubating to being at large or impact, they would have to do certain things.
Yeah.
Um, but I suspect that would be my sense so far is that would be the first place you would see some sort of enforcement mechanism is during that graduation process.
Yeah, and I think these are all things that we'll get to eventually, right? Um, I don't want to start um, spending too much time on that stuff because I see that as like a natural thing that follows next, right? But yeah, I don't want to get bogged down in that before we get this published and like start circulating with folks.
Totally.
But I would like to
Um,
get some more visibility on it through a blog and some tweets, LinkedIn. But again, understanding what that call to action is important. So
yeah, I think one thing I might suggest there is we're going to be working with some projects early on to like test this against the real world a little bit. And once we have a little bit of that, a sense of how that goes, and some feedback and some thoughts, then I'd be very excited to do that. But right now, I'd love to kind of soft launch it at the moment.
socialize it a little bit. Okay, sounds
Yeah.
good. Okay.
But yeah, Robin, I'm 100% on board. I'm very excited to promote this because I think it's been a lot of work. There's been a lot of thought put into it. I think it's a valuable deliverable. It's one of the more interesting. I worked on a lot of different security standards and guidelines and policies, and this is by far one of the most interesting ones I've worked on because of what it's attempting to, what because of the prior art that's there and what it's attempting to do. So I think it's worthwhile of that stuff, and so I'm excited to, when we get to that point. Um, so the next step here is I'm going to just polish up the README. Also, you might notice that there are not super well connected links between the documents at the moment. That was intentional because I wanted to get it into GitHub and be like, okay, this looks good. And I would go back and go link everything up. So that'll happen probably just today, just to get it done. Um, and next part is working with some teams for doing some outreach with teams to test this against the real world. The way that would work and what it would look like is having one of the things in here that is not uploaded yet, um, but should be, is this list of basically this file that would be like a dashboard like checklist that every project would maintain for their own for themselves. And so the idea is that this templated project would go in every this templated file will go in every project, and we would sit down with them and kind of go through the list and turn these things green or red or whatever the icon is. Um, and that way we could um, easily monitor for how folks are doing and also be able to get feedback on what some of these items in the event that we need to change the guideline or maybe the way we organize things in priority groups doesn't make as much sense as we thought initially, and things like that. So that kind of outreach has already started happening, but you can expect it getting into more like full swing next week after I'm back from DEF CON and Black Hat. So that's going to be a big part of the ongoing work for the rest of this half related to this is tweaks on this as we get it used and deployed with all of the projects, starting with the impact projects. Alrighty.
So, Rod, real quick, I was just poking around, and apologies if you're gonna cover this, but I clicked on the run book. I noticed there's like a lot of links back to HackMD.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I didn't clean that up. My bad.
okay,
Yep,
no worries. But the idea is to make this self-contained in GitHub, right?
that's correct. Yeah, and this is this. Now that it's all in here, I forgot to take these out when I uploaded it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, everything will be that's what I mentioned before. Like I need to go clean up links and stuff like that now that it's in GitHub.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm going to go do all of that because I wanted to make sure the links actually worked before I went and did a lot of work, even though theoretically I should be
Sure.
able to predict that stuff. I was just nervous about it. So yeah, that'll all get cleaned up. Um, so yeah. Um, any other questions or thoughts on the compliance guide? Thank you for the golf clap, Matt.
No,
Yeah, it looks really good. I
don't
mean,
be
we've
don't
talked.
be afraid to
Sorry, go
put
ahead,
it out.
Matt.
I said, don't never be afraid to put stuff out in draft format.
Yeah, right. I'll just do it.
Matt,
This
your
is
audio is really low.
I don't. This is a new laptop, and I don't know why it's low on certain platforms versus others. So
Okay.
I'll just say that I can lean in closer, but I don't know what else to do. Um, I'll just say that super impressed, as always. So thank you so much, Adam.
I appreciate it, Matt. I really do. I'm looking forward to not only just like the impact on this OpenJS projects. I think there's like a ton of lessons learned already from this from the prior art places, and hopefully um, we can use this through the rest of the year to like drive conversations on and feedback and improvements on those sources as well. I think that's a big part of this. And there's a lot of work to do to capture that effectively, but I'm really looking forward to that part. So as we get ramped up on that, I'm looking forward to getting folks like your thoughts in particular on how to do that effectively so that like we can show up in good faith like hey we learned some things and maybe we have some thoughts and how we can make some stuff that's out there better because I think that could be as much of an impact on for this project as the actual impact on OpenJS projects themselves. um, Cool. So with that said, CVD runbook. Um, After I wrote the initial version, I heard feedback from folks on the format and structure on how I wrote this originally, which was very much meant to be an informative, really walk through guide where it assumed that the person who's been doing this has literally never done it before. And coming from the military, I my um, mental approach to this was something crazy happens with a vulnerability disclosure or a vulnerability that you discover yourselves, and it needs to be dealt with. And in that emergency moment, you pull the binder off the shelf, you dust it off, and then you go, step one, what do I do? Um, but there was feedback to that approach maybe was a little heavy and maybe not always necessary. So I took that feedback to heart, and I didn't change the original content because I think that approach is still valid. But what I've done instead is I have created a more, and I have this all in just one file right now, just for simplicity's sake with HackMD. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to break these things up into separate files. Is to have a this idea of a templated file that is used as a task tracker file that basically it's a bunch of markdown and you put into a new issue. And that way you can checkbox your way through where you are in this process, um, so that you just don't miss anything because there's so many discrete steps along the way. It's easy to make a mistake or to forget to do whether or not something should be done. And based upon that, if you have no idea what this idea means, then you have that more in-depth guide. But after I wrote this, I realized might make more sense for there to be a condensed version of that in-depth guide to just kind of give like the TLDR one paragraph version of what should be done in that step. So I think that makes sense to do next here.
I think
So,
also, Red,
mm,
just like really high level, I think we also need to kind of morph this stuff for our projects, right? And what I mean by that specifically is like on call, like there's no one on call.
well, that's the other part of this. Is this was built for the initial audience for this was projects, larger projects that do have those sorts of concepts. Um, or
I don't think any of our projects have anyone that's on call, right?
yeah, yeah. I think the interesting thing here is that um, it's meant to be like a descriptive identifier of like a person doing something, but if it effectively is just the maintainer themselves, then that is that's fine. I think the interesting challenge here is like there is a version of this for smaller projects that I think is important to make. Um, but regardless of the number of folks involved, breaking up the roles to help explain who does what was like the intent. But um, yeah, sorry, I see a bunch of hands up. Matt, I think you were first.
Yeah, help disambiguate this in the context of vulnerability submission to Node.js Foundation. So, I mean, OpenJS Foundation. Um, I'm trying to figure the path. What is the canonical path into the system? Because it goes back to the on-call thing. Because like, I'm only familiar with Apache, and Apache basically you are always encouraged for any project Apache to go to a central reporting thing, and then there is not person is not on call, but there's a group of people who immediately act upon it, and then they route it to the proper project, and they're expected that the project management committee, the maintainers, have a private channel that they get notified, and then the foundation level people track if it's they track the status of it there. So I mean, is there an overall process like that, and where does this fall in the context of that?
Yeah, man, that's interesting. This is meant to be adopted by individual projects themselves. So there is not a central reporting function imagined here. Instead, this project is
Are
um,
there do projects have private list serves, private anything, or for
that
maintainers?
in parallel to this, the idea and part of the compliance standards is that projects have their own have either GitHub private vulnerability reporting set up, or they're using HackerOne or something like that, so that they have a reporting channel.
Yeah,
The
I think that needs to be unwound. I think they need guidance on that first and foremost. I mean, because they need to be told definitively how they should handle something in a private manner to not
Mhm.
cause public alarm. So if the project is like people might create something publicly or do something publicly or react publicly, and they really should not.
Yes, yes. This goes into a lot of detail on those things. And to your point on the not public part, there are other aspects of this that I do not have immediately available to go find them. But see if they're right.
Yeah, I think the high level guidance, having the high level saying, do not, here's the chant, here's what you should do at a high level. And once you get the private thing set up, then here's all the check marks after that. Sorry, Chris, for stepping on your raised hands.
Oh no, it's so what this does have also is as there's a part of the compliance guidelines mentioned expecting the use of a vulnerability disclosure platform in some way. And then on top of that, as a part of this, to your point, there's also templated vulnerability disclosure policies, which also heavily um, make heavy use of the fact that the project is using GitHub private vulnerability reporting. And then on top of that, finally, there is with this project, there's also response templates and things like that. And all of that also does go into the private vulnerability reporting aspect. And these templates themselves, there's a guidance document on why these templates look the way they do and the information they have in them, which I think hits on your point of like you should have private vulnerability reporting turned on in your project or using
So
HackerOne and stuff like that.
again, pardon Chris for just one thought. So it's like if I come to OpenJS Foundation and I want to create a new project, or if I'm a new maintainer, do I have a landing page that tells me the high-level process and some of these assumptions that these things need to be set up, for, break glass and pull lever, and then, then you go to this thing, right? Is there a high-level recommendation for setting these things up, these private GitHub security? You said it's assumed, but where is it? I don't like
It's
assumptions.
actually
So,
it's actually in the compliance guidelines themselves. It's a part of those. So there's a category around.
I think that
Uh,
I think they're good here, but I think that the foundation level should have, like Apache Foundation have a high level thing for like securing projects, high level that points to this guide and has a leading section on
oh,
handling.
I see.
So, it needs. I'm saying that there needs to be a higher level landing page before I dive into the weeds.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Now I see what you're talking about. So I think the answer to that is we are working on becoming a CNA as a foundation. And I think the documentation and website we'll have around having an OpenJS CNA will address that problem. So I think the way we imagine is like as a CNA, you have to have a list of all the CVs that the CNA.
Yeah, I'm more worried about the management aspect, the top level of management, to clearly tell people,
Mhm.
because like Apache Foundation, I chaired the project for a year and a half before, and somebody waited, and we did. So suddenly we got we put our first public release out, and suddenly over the weekend we got our two first CVs reported. Lovely open source people that they were, because they held them back. They knew that they existed, but they wanted the public announced to build off it, to build publicity for their company. Long story. So I'm like, where do I start? So like, where do I go? So it's kind of like where, when this happens to you, it's like you said, like the nuclear code, you dust this thing off, but how do I know where to go to get the manual,
Yep.
dust it off, and if I'm setting up a project, that should be a checklist saying, set up a project, make sure you set this GitHub thing, it's a training manual for maintainers of a project in general, basically.
I'm with you here. So I hear what you're saying. I think so what I hear is I think in the context of having a CNA, there's going to be a series of there's going to be some documentation around one list of projects and where they're and references to their vulnerability disclosure policies. There's going to be a list of CVEs that have been issued by the CNA itself. There's going to have to be a vulnerability disclosure policy for the
Yeah.
CNA itself.
So thank you. I beat you over the head with this.
Yeah.
I apologize to
Yeah.
everyone here and Chris, but it goes back to like there are expectations at a foundation level at Apache, saying if you report, central reporting, this comes in. Here's the expectations after you submit your report. Within 24 hours, you'll get a response back, from somebody in the
Yep.
maintainer community for this. So there's kind of like the management is not just for the, it's two sides. It's kind of like the inputs and outputs in this black box thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is good. Thank you, Matt. Chris, you had your hand up.
Yeah. As an aside, I don't know about anybody else, but your screen is, oh, okay. Oh, now it's blurry again, and now it's visible again. Okay. That wasn't why I raised my hand. Yeah, I think we should change the team name or the role name, the on-call, because I don't think that there's any issue with like the actual actions that they're doing and the process that you've laid out. I think we just have heartburn about the name. I can tell you that anybody who, and maybe even including them, but anybody who is not a site reliability engineer is going to bristle at the term on call. We don't like to be on call. We don't want to be on call as much as possible. So I think with the things that you're having them do according to these guidelines. Or wait, we're in the guidelines. I'm talking about the run book.
Yeah.
So yeah, the stuff that you're asking them to do with the run book, these are, as this would be PCERT, right? This would be the incident response team. So I would just suggest that we call it something like that. It doesn't have to be the full PCERT, but the response team or something like that. And then that does two things. A, we know what that is in terms of the sort of the common nomenclature, and it also aligns it with like the cert and first, and yeah, it just disambiguates, and then it also prevents us from immediately going like, wait, on call team, wait, what's all this about? So that's my feedback.
Sounds good to me. Matt.
Yeah, I think that's where I was headed with this context thing, with get rid of on call, because I bristled as well. It's basically about a timeline, and I don't think we need to give a name to a role here. I think it's incumbent upon the project leaders, the maintainers, to be responsible to react within a given time frame. It's the expectations. I don't even know if we need to give it a role name at all. It's maybe help for us in developing the guide, but in general, there's a flat roles within these projects anyways. This write access maintainer and read access general contributor. So
Yeah, one of the things that one of the pieces of feedback before that I had when I had the roles in there was to align the roles in the guideline with the roles as they're defined in GitHub private vulnerability reporting. There is not a concept of an on-call there. That was more of like a trying to figure out a way, yeah, security triage team, right? It was a way to say like whoever's job it is to look at this first. And I think there's a lot of different ways to label that. So I'm pretty chill on the details.
yeah,
It's
it
filler.
all at the end of the day, it all boils down to a handful of really good
Mhm.
maintainers, that know the
Yeah.
project and who care about it, right?
Yeah.
So no way to create these fancy terms like you've got 3 or 4 key maintainers. They're creating a response team, and we're doing they're the same people, So
Mhm.
it's just basically the project maintainers must manage these things in this way,
Yep.
Well, they're not always the same people though.
No, they're not.
In small projects where you have like single maintainer, like sure, but in projects like Express and I think Node, I don't think they're the same group of individuals. There's definitely overlap for sure, but I think it is valuable and important to call it to name it something like not on call, as I think we're in agreement with, but like not just simply say the maintainers will do. Like I think it's
Yeah.
okay to call it out as
Yeah.
PCERT
So
or response team or triage team or whatever you want to say.
I mean, do we have concepts of different roles within projects when we set up team, or is it flat like maintainers and
Node calls it triage, the triage team for security.
Yeah, and
cultivate?
it's very ad hoc. It's completely dependent on the project. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what Matt was asking, was like, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but was there sort of no, yeah, it's ad hoc.
Yeah, it's kind of like there was this assumption at Apache Foundation that you had everyone's maintainers, but there was like the core maintainers who were like the top 4 or 5 people who would be responsible for these things, but we never called them the triage team or the on-call team. We never called them anything like that. So it's just kind of interesting.
Core maintainers, I mean, that sounds good from a generic as long as it's not capitalized, because sometimes we have core team that is capped. So if we want to be, yeah. So change it to on, you're saying so change from on call to the core maintainers will.
Yeah, one of the things that the guide really tried to do that I took to heart from observing how some disclosures went down in groups of even just like 3 or 4 maintainers is a little bit of a tragedy of the commons problem. And so if you really go read through the document in detail, there's a lot of emphasis put in on the idea of identifying, all right, Alice is going to do this and Bob is going to do this. And we're going to make sure like Alice and Bob understand what is needed to do that. And we have a way of deciding that it is going to be Alice and Bob doing those things. Because those are the things that really slow down an effective response. And those are the things that get heavy into human drama. So the document is heavy on helping that sort of helping self-organization in not just like the mechanical things that they as a group must do, but in also coming to a consensus on who is doing the things and how do we actually come to this consensus. Because those are the messiest parts of any sort of vulnerability response if they're not well established. And especially if you are dusting this thing off for the first time and you have folks that are not experienced in doing this. So I think the thing that I will adjust on here is I'm not really hung up on specific calling it on call. It was just an idea to start. The what there is though is an idea that um, as a process, there is if are multiple maintainers, that there is some way for within a reasonable SLA for somebody to say, I have got this and I am starting to work on it. The easy V1 version of writing is to designate an on-call, because then I can assume that they've had that conversation amongst themselves in some way. But if we don't want to assume that, then instead, uh, I think the fix is to put into the document um, to specifically call out, like, if you don't have somebody already designated as an on-call, and if you do, awesome sauce. If you do not, then it needs to be somebody's responsibility to make sure that somebody is actually working on this thing so we can hit SLAs. Because without that, then you burn a lot of time getting, a lot of SLA time just getting through that tragedy of the commons problem. There are other more designated roles that are defined in the document. And again, that kind of goes to just trying to align with how GitHub private vulnerability reporting allocates roles, because there are quite a few roles in GitHub PVR, like more than you would think, the way that they have it sorted out. I have a link here. Yeah, I have a link right here for it. See, so these are all of the roles that you can assign to people in GitHub PVR. So these are used in here just to make sure that when the security advisory actually goes out, that folks are actually using the tool and filling out the form correctly and all that kind of good stuff. Matt, question 1, are there any government initiatives to set bomb triage time based on expectations, SLAs? To answer that from a corporate perspective, any sort of organization that has a severe concern around GDPR has to triage all of their security vulnerabilities from their bug bounty programs within 24 hours of receipt.
And that matched the Apache criteria as well. I mean, I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, the guideline in this is a bit more gentle. It gives folks 72 hours, and the reason for that is GDPR assumes you're holding on to private data, and the primary audience for this is not are mostly libraries and the like, so they're not holding on to user data at all. They're there's, libraries or standalone applications that are not actually running themselves. So also observing that that given this self-organizing function and the fact that folks were already busy, giving them 72 hours to respond seemed really quite reasonable.
Yeah, this goes back to the internal process versus external process and what to expect. When I report, should I expect?
Yep.
I think that goes back to that. And it's 20, like Apache is like 24 hours to respond internally, at least to know that you're triaging it to 24-hour triage. Official response 72 hours type of thing. So I don't.
Yeah, this one, if you check it out, I have this list right here, and I have this templated out to give individual teams the ability to adjust this to what makes sense to them. So there's the initial acknowledgement, which I kind of said as a default of 72 hours just to be reasonable because I assumed I would get a lot of pushback if I said 24.
So is this t-shirt one size fits all, or I would expect large projects to have more prescriptive guidance versus
this is fill in the blank for the individual projects. So the baseline 72, triage time to be able to actually look at the bug, understand the bug, and be able to validate it and accept it. I have set to 14 days right now, which is very, very generous. But then we're going back to the problem of how much time do these people have realistically, and so we don't want to set expectations that set them up for failure. The other interesting thing that was quite contentious when we were building out the original guidelines was the remediation SLAs. Yeah, so they're all responded to within 14 days. The expectation is that vulnerabilities would be patched basically within 90 days, and that was inspired by the Google Project Zero disclosure rules. There are recommended ones that are more aggressive, but are not expected. That say, like, if something's being actively exploited and it's a critical or high, it's patched within 14 days, and then non-criticals are patched within 60 days. But these SLAs were considered so. There was a number of reasons why those SLAs were considered non-viable by a number of projects. So, like, for example, the release cadences of Node itself, I got feedback would not be compatible with that. So this was designed to be a reasonable baseline that all projects could reasonably achieve. And yeah, that was basically how they were set. This one actively exploit critical vulnerabilities or patched within 30 days. I am very open to setting this to a shorter amount of time. Project Zero sets it to a week, so that's 7 days if it's being actively exploited. But then at the same time, like, again, we're dealing with we don't want to set teams up for fail, especially single maintainers up for failure by giving them an SLA that just is not humanly achievable. So
Yeah, and I think even that language of like giving them an SLA, like we're not doing that, right? Like I like this idea of fill in the blanks for your project based on what you can do. The only folks that we can really commit to having a response time is foundation staff, like practically speaking, right? And I think that's something that I think Matt had brought up before, which was something I was noodling with, which is like, what is the foundation's role here? And is that also clearly defined in a similar checklist, right? Of how do we support projects that are having these issues? Like, and it might be simple. It might be like create a private Slack channel and invite people, right? or it might be other things. So I think that's something to noodle with if we don't have it already.
Yeah,
I think a lot of this will come up.
that's exactly what I was headed for, Ben. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because I know at Apache they bring in their legal console, they bring in there's like a triage at a foundation level, like how important is this, and what
Yeah.
eyes do we get on this, you know?
But we also need to set expectations as well. And then with LFIT as well, we're definitely not staffed to do that. It's me and 2 half-time people. So.
Yeah.
you
And I
know.
think that's okay, Robin. It's more like, let's just make sure we've got that sorted so folks know what support they get from the foundation when things are on fire, right?
Yeah. And our big projects have had difficulty with the 90 days as well, where we've had to ask for extensions from Google, for example. So with mostly volunteer-led projects, it just kind of puts our projects in a pickle a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, the important thing is for projects to think about it. Like, what is a practical response time for some of these things, and that's what really matters rather than the exact time frame, I think, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I think my goal with this has always been to give them the tools to be able to communicate effectively within the boundaries of what is in the realm of possible.
Yeah.
That said, Matt, I think the first sort of stuff you'll wind up seeing related to what is the foundation doing in this context is once the CNA is set up, because that will naturally include more involvement and is that first pinky toe into that space, because all of the stuff we'll have to do for that CNA at the foundation level anyway.
So what's the timeline for that?
Actually, now that the guidelines are kind of like solid, this is a next item for Ulysses. Uh, oh my gosh, Jordan. I'm terrible with name recall. You saw it happen live. Like I see Jordan every week, and I still can't remember his name sometimes. Like so.
Yeah,
And
I just feel that these two are, you can't have one without the other. So
yep.
maybe keeping this
So
private until there's a like draft for the CNA stuff. That would be to make sure that they're simpatico and reference each other. That'd be awesome, right?
yeah, the next step is for us to take the trainings and to have the meetings with. We're going to use Red Hat as our root CNA, so to make things a little bit smoother. So once we have that training done,
Why would you do that?
what was that?
I'm joking. Red Hat. Joking.
Oh, I didn't hear what you said.
I said, why would you use Red Hat?
I have a lot of respect for MITRE, but in the context of an open source project, I think maybe I have heard good things about a bit more of a hands-on approach with Red Hat, I would say.
It was completely rhetorical.
Sorry, I'm terrible at this, and I'm terrible at catching those things in the morning before my meds kick in. Yeah, so this idea here, yeah, and I can drop this link in here for you so you all can see details. But
so there is a timeline for the CNA stuff.
yeah, now we just need to take the training and start getting that moving. There's a couple of open questions. Like what we want to do is like have the conversation, meet with them, do the training stuff first, and then in preparation for launch, we have to develop our own policy. We have to develop like those artifacts, like how are we going to store CVEs? How are we going to like make that available to like for public viewing? How are we going to keep the list of CVEs available for projects to be able to pull on those? There's a bunch of internal process we have to put together as well. But that I'd like to hope we could just dual track that between like the process with Red Hat and our own stuff internally. And then once everything is lined up, then we just press the button and launch.
So, the last question I posted in Slack, and I'm sorry Chris left because he was most in tune with that work group and the community in OpenSSF. But I know they plan to support like a security triage team for projects. We plan to, since we're all one big happy family, is
that actually happening? I thought that got
I don't know. That's why I said Chris would be the definitive word on the status. I mean, I dropped off in February, everything OpenSF related. Anyway.
I believe that project, there is this idea, this might be the same thing. There's an idea of OpenSSF having like an open source SOC almost, is the way that I heard of it. And I was paying quite a bit of attention to that one. And my understanding is that kind of got shelved for a number of logistical and practical reasons, I guess. So I can go follow up on that, but my understanding is that one's kind of on pause at the moment.
I thought it was interesting because they promised two things. One, to have a call list of security experts to bring in if there was a critical issue that was found, that you could, and also they would provide infrastructure to, like, if you needed to run something at scale on like multiple servers or whatever, they would help provide infrastructure. So that the on-call list is kind of interesting. Like if there were people who are security experts who could be, called upon to help. Anyways, like a dial up your friendly
Dial a nerd.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. And I think my hope with the CNA itself is it starts creating that focal point of structure for people to reach out to, and then we can understand what the needs are. There are some teams that already have lots of great process, like Node is really strong process. Electron has really strong process. How I'm interested to see how much we can help them or refine them there, given their native experience and what they're doing. Whereas other projects, I expect more help, need them to need more help. But what form that service experience takes is, I think, um, something I'm looking forward to discovering once we actually have the core thing set up and people have a place to go and be like, oh, there's Brud, the point of contact for the OpenJS CNA. What am I doing? What do I do? And working through it from there. But yeah, I think, yeah.
I just want to sandwich all my comments. First of all, nothing I've said or asked or anything is to detract from how impressed I am with all this work. It's beyond all my expectations of where we started, early in the year. So, yeah.
No, awesome. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I think all of this is actually really good insight, and I learned, it definitely, this is why more eyes always helps. So because this is actually really good perspective. So I actually am really looking forward. Like bug bounty is like my actual core professional domain in security. So I am looking forward to building out this idea and hypothesis that I have to creating an effective service model within the foundation, budgets and resourcing, allowing, because that's the constraint really. Sweet. So we are at time. Anything else, folks, before we drop for the day?
Just wanted to come back to the CNA timeline. Rod, do you think that's something we could do this quarter?
Oh yeah.
I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot, but I just don't know really what's involved.
We have to take the training. Once we take the training, we have to produce some deliverables, like policies. We have to get some tooling set up to track CVEs and publish them. But otherwise, there's actually not as much work in it as you would think. The training itself and the interviews are the big one, and so that's just
Maybe we'll talk in our one-on-one
Ulysses.
this week about how I can help.
That's
Get
just
folks
Ulysses
scheduled and all that
and
stuff.
Jordan and I getting, setting up time together. Neither of those
Okay.
guys are here today, so if they were, we would have talked about that actually because we were talking about the CVD stuff. But the training itself, we can take asynchronously. It's about 4 or 5 YouTube videos, so it's an afternoon, and then it's just about scheduling the meetings to where they give us a test. Hopefully, we do okay. And once we've done that test, we sync on next steps, and then it's just about producing these deliverables. I think the heaviest lift is going to be the changes to is identifying how we would like to track the CVEs internally so that projects can get them issued. And then the other one is being able to is how we would like to list the CVEs that have been published on the OpenJS website in a nice, easy, scalable way.
Okay.
And I know we've talked about this a little bit before. Chris had some really strong and good thoughts on this. So when we actually have it for the agenda item next, I expect us to work through those actually pretty quickly.
Okay, cool.
Yep. But yes, my expectation is we can get this done by the end of the quarter, barring administrivia on Red Hat's end. That's the only likely slowdown. Like if we dedicate like real time to it, it happens pretty quickly. When I built out the Zoom CNA, we were talking about weeks when that happened. So, and that most of it was waiting to schedule meetings with MITRE and stuff like that. All right, folks. Thank you so much as always. Appreciate your attendance. I appreciate the feedback. And I will see you all next week. Toodles.